It was the day of the wedding, the day he was finally going to be happy with her. But that morning, the sheriff never imagined that the woman he had betrayed would show up at his wedding, armed with a truth so painful it would end his life. Welcome to Through Crime, your portal into the most chilling true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and the darkest corners of criminal history. Don't forget to like, share, and comment on this video, and if you are new here, do well to hit the subscribe button. We dig deep into the facts, uncover shocking twists, and explore the theories that keep investigators and the world on edge. Stay back and enjoy. Sheriff Carter Gray was the pride of small-town Texas. A man known for his dedication to the job, for his calm demeanor, and his seemingly perfect family. He had it all: a beautiful wife, Emily, 2 kids, a cozy home, and a reputation as someone you could trust. His life was the embodiment of what people dreamed of when they thought of the ideal small-town sheriff. But beneath that perfect surface, something dark and twisted was brewing. It all started when Carter became distant. At first, Emily thought it was just stress from the job. He was always gone, always working late nights, barely home for dinner. But as weeks turned into months, she noticed the change in him. He was short with her, avoiding their conversations and spending more time on his phone. She tried to reach out, but the man she once knew seemed to slip further away, his warmth replaced by cold indifference. One night, Emily decided to confront him. She stood in the kitchen, waiting for him to come home after another late shift. When he walked through the door, the familiar scent of his uniform and the tired look in his eyes felt like a stranger's presence. "Carter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on? You've been distant. I feel like I don't even know you anymore." He stood there for a moment, his eyes avoiding hers, before he spoke with a tone that made her heart drop. "I'm just tired, Emily. Work's been hard. You wouldn't understand." But Emily knew something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. The next few weeks passed in a blur of silence and distance until the day Carter disappeared. One evening, Carter didn't come home at all. At first, Emily thought he'd been caught up in something on the job, but as the hours stretched into days, panic set in. She called the station, but no one had heard from him. It was unlike Carter to go off the grid, and the town, with its tight-knit community, noticed the sheriff's sudden absence. Then came the news, a piece of information that turned Emily's world upside down. A group of private investigators, hired by a close family friend, discovered that Carter had packed up and left town without a word. He had vanished to a new, smaller town in the middle of nowhere. And the worst part? He had moved there to start a new life with another woman. The betrayal hit Emily like a slap in the face. Carter had been seeing someone else, someone who wasn't her. All those late nights, all the emotional distance were because of her. Emily's heart shattered. She couldn't believe it. The love of her life, the man who had promised to stand by her side forever, had thrown it all away for a woman he barely knew. It didn't take long for the new woman to be revealed. Her name was Rebecca. She was young, beautiful, and everything Emily wasn't. Carter had left his family behind for her, and he planned to marry her, to build a new life with someone else. The day before the wedding, Emily found herself standing in the small church in that distant town. She had driven hours to get there, driven by a mixture of pain, rage, and the need for answers. She had heard rumors, seen the invitations, and knew exactly what Carter was about to do. But as she stood in the back of the church, hidden in the shadows, she realized something far more devastating. She wasn't there to beg for him to come back. She wasn't there to make peace. No, she was there for something far darker. The ceremony began. Carter stood at the altar, smiling as Rebecca walked down the aisle, her wedding dress glowing in the soft light of the church. Emily could feel the rage building inside her. The man she had loved, the man who had sworn to be faithful, was standing there, smiling at another woman. It was almost too much to bear. Emily's hands shook as she gripped the cold metal object in her purse. She didn't know what she was about to do, but she knew it was the only way to get the justice she had been denied. As Rebecca and Carter exchanged vows, Emily's feet moved forward, almost of their own accord. Her heart raced, her breath shallow as she approached the altar. No one noticed her at first, until she pulled out the weapon. The sharp click of the gun's safety being released sent a jolt of fear through the room. Carter turned, his face draining of color as he saw Emily standing there, eyes burning with betrayal and anguish. For a split second it seemed like time had stopped. "Emily, what are you?" Carter began, but he never finished. With a loud crack the shot rang out. It struck him in the chest and the room fell into chaos. Rebecca screamed, dropping to the floor in horror, while Emily stood there, her hands still raised, the weapon shaking in her grasp. Carter fell to the ground, his face twisted in shock and confusion. Blood pooled around him, staining the pristine white carpet of the church. Emily's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't feel regret. All she felt was a deep, dark sense of justice. The chaos in the church was deafening. People screamed, ran, and called for help, but no one moved toward Carter. Emily stood there, staring at the man who had once promised her forever, lying dead on the floor. "Justice," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You took everything from me. Now you're gone." The police arrived minutes later, but there was no escaping what Emily had done. She was arrested, her face plastered all over the news as the woman who shot her unfaithful husband dead on his wedding day. People called her a monster, others called her a victim. No one knew the whole truth. No one knew the years of emotional neglect, the lies, and the betrayal. As Emily sat in her jail cell, she thought about the life she had lost. She thought about Carter, about Rebecca, about the life she could have had. But the one thing she didn't regret was what she had done. It was the only way she could make him pay. But as the trial loomed, there was one question that no one had yet answered. Had Carter's betrayal been the true reason Emily pulled the trigger, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? The truth, as it turned out, was far more sinister than anyone had imagined. And the real story was only just beginning. Emily sat in the cold, sterile jail cell, her hands trembling as she gripped the rough metal bars. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her like a 1,000-pound stone, but beneath it, there was something else, something far more insidious. Her actions, while driven by a deep, all-consuming betrayal, had only cracked open the surface of the story. The truth, as it turned out, was darker than anyone could have imagined. The trial was looming. Lawyers, cameras, and the entire town buzzed with anticipation. Some people thought she was a hero, an avenging wife, a woman scorned who had finally taken control of her shattered life. Others labeled her a cold-blooded killer, a woman whose grief had turned into madness. But the truth, buried deep beneath the surface, had not yet been uncovered. And it was this truth that Emily would soon be forced to confront. The days leading up to the trial were filled with nothing but whispers and media frenzy. Emily was no longer a sheriff's wife. She was the woman who killed him. The headlines screamed of betrayal, revenge, and a woman pushed too far. But the one thing no one knew was the secret Carter had been keeping from Emily long before he disappeared. It was in a small, dimly lit room that the truth finally started to come to light. Detective Mark Collins, a seasoned investigator who had been assigned to Emily's case, was poring over the details of Carter's life. He had dug through his bank records, his phone calls, and even his social media profiles, trying to piece together a clearer picture of what had led to his murder. And then he found it, something that no one had suspected. Carter had been involved in something far more dangerous than an affair. It was a quiet whisper at first. One phone call to a shady individual, followed by more phone calls, and finally, the discovery of a series of encrypted messages between Carter and a man who had been a part of an underground criminal operation. The sheriff, the man everyone thought they knew, had been in deep with people who had connections to drug cartels, arms dealing, and human trafficking. His life, his career, had been a carefully constructed lie, a mask he had worn to hide the truth of his corrupt dealings. But what made this even more chilling was the connection to Rebecca, the woman Carter had left Emily for. She wasn't just some innocent woman he had fallen in love with. No, she was part of the operation, an enforcer, someone who had been assigned to keep an eye on him, and who had slowly worked her way into his life. Carter had been with Rebecca not because of love, but because she had manipulated him, using his loneliness and desperation to get closer to him, all while feeding him lies about a better life, a fresh start. Detective Collins couldn't believe it. The sheriff, the man who had sworn to uphold the law, was a part of something far darker than anyone had imagined. And now, Emily, who had thought she was avenging a simple case of infidelity, had unknowingly become entangled in a web of crime and deceit that went much deeper than anyone realized. The night before the trial, Emily sat alone in her cell, unable to sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of Carter, of the life they had once shared, of the love that had turned into betrayal. But now, as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of betrayal, not just from Carter but from everyone. The life she had built, the home they had shared, had all been built on lies. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The officer outside informed her that she had a visitor, Detective Collins. He had something to show her. As Emily was escorted into the interrogation room, her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen Collins since her arrest, and she wasn't sure what he wanted. His expression was grim, but there was something else, something unreadable in his eyes. "Sit down, Emily," he said softly, motioning to the chair across from him. "I have something you need to know." She took a seat, her stomach churning. "What is it?" Collins leaned forward, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "I've been looking into Carter's life. And I found something you need to understand before the trial begins." Emily looked down at the papers, her hands shaking. "What are you talking about?" "Carter wasn't just cheating on you, Emily. He wasn't just being a selfish husband," Collins began, his voice steady. "He was involved in something far worse, something that put both of you in danger. And Rebecca, she wasn't the innocent woman you thought she was. She was working with him. She was part of a criminal organization." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "No, that can't be true." "It's true. Carter wasn't just the sheriff. He was in too deep with people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. And when you shot him, you weren't just killing a cheating husband. You were killing a man who had been a part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous." The room felt like it was closing in on Emily as the realization hit her. All the love, all the betrayal, had been part of something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her life, had been living a double life, and in the end, it had cost him everything. "Why are you telling me this?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Because," Collins replied, his voice low, "you need to know the truth before it's too late. There are people who will do whatever it takes to keep this hidden. And you're in danger, Emily. You don't even know who's really after you." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. The truth was a bitter pill, one that she wasn't sure she could swallow. But as the gravity of it all sank in, she realized something that terrified her more than anything else. This wasn't over. The story wasn't finished. The real battle was just beginning. As Emily sat in that sterile room, staring at the papers that had shattered everything she thought she knew, a feeling of cold dread washed over her. The trial was only the beginning. The real question now was whether she could survive what came next. Who was pulling the strings behind Carter's death? And who else in her life had been hiding their own secrets? The truth had already shattered her world, but it was clear now, there were many more secrets yet to be revealed. Secrets that, if exposed, would change everything. Emily's mind raced, the implications of Detective Collins' revelations threatening to overwhelm her. She had always trusted the man she had married, and now she was left with nothing but a tangled web of lies, betrayal, and deceit. As the trial approached, she knew the questions would multiply, not just from the court but from her own mind. What had happened to the man she had loved? Who was responsible for pulling the strings that led to his ultimate destruction? And most importantly, who else was involved? The days leading up to the trial were a blur. The media circus had only grown more intense, and Emily had become the focal point of it all. People whispered about her in hushed tones, some with sympathy, others with judgment. The town that once knew her as the wife of a well-respected sheriff now saw her as a murderer, a woman who had destroyed everything in a single tragic act of vengeance. But Emily knew that the truth had only started to come to light, and she couldn't let it rest. She couldn't allow Carter's lies, the betrayal, to be the final chapter of her life. Late one night, in the cold confines of her cell, Emily's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. It was Collins again, but this time he wasn't alone. "We need to talk," he said, his voice laced with urgency. He ushered Emily into the small visitation room, where a man she didn't recognize was standing. "This is Special Agent Reyes," Collins introduced, gesturing to the stranger. "He's from the FBI, and we've uncovered something else, something that ties back to Carter's death." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The FBI? How deep did this really go? "Agent Reyes has been investigating the criminal network that Carter was involved in. And we found more," Collins continued, his face grim. "We believe Carter's murder wasn't just about revenge. It's connected to something much larger. And now you're not just a witness. You're part of this investigation." Reyes stepped forward, placing a folder on the table between them. "We've traced the money trail, Carter's accounts, his connections, his dealings. This network, the one Carter got involved in, it's a front for something much more dangerous. A series of illegal arms deals. And it's been operating under the radar for years." Emily's chest tightened as the pieces started to fall into place. Carter had been part of something criminal, something so insidious that it had cost him his life. But what did this have to do with her? She had only wanted the truth about his affair, his betrayal. She never imagined she would be drawn into this world of shadows and danger. "We've also discovered that Rebecca wasn't just some woman Carter met after the divorce," Reyes continued, his voice cold and steady. "She was a key figure in the operation. And she's been working with some very dangerous people. People who aren't afraid to eliminate anyone who stands in their way." Carter's decision to walk away from the operation, his attempt to start a new life with her, wasn't something they were willing to tolerate. Emily could feel the blood drain from her face. "You're saying they had him killed?" "We believe so," Reyes replied. "And we're also looking into the possibility that Rebecca may have had a hand in it. She might have played a larger role in what happened to Carter than we initially realized." The realization hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Rebecca, the woman who had been the catalyst for all of this, wasn't just a victim of Carter's infidelity. She was part of the reason he was dead. Part of the reason Emily had lost everything. And now the truth was coming out, not just about Carter's betrayal, but about the dark forces that had been at work behind the scenes. But there was more. Collins wasn't finished yet. "Emily," he said softly, "there's something else. Carter's death wasn't just about his betrayal of you. There's a chance it was also about revenge. Someone in this town, someone close to him, might have had a personal vendetta. We think they may have been using Rebecca to get to Carter, to use his own downfall as a way to take out anyone who stood in their way. Emily's mind raced, trying to grasp the full scope of what Collins was saying. The sheriff, her ex-husband, had been a pawn in a much larger game. He had been targeted by forces beyond his control, forces that were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. She looked at Collins, her voice barely a whisper. Who could have done this? Who would have wanted Carter dead so badly? Collins hesitated. We think it might have been someone within his own department. Someone who knew too much. Someone who had a personal stake in his downfall. Emily's heart stopped. The implications were horrifying. If someone in the department had been behind this, then the entire town was filled with lies. No one was safe. Not even Emily. The trial day arrived and the courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters lined the aisles, eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had shot a man in cold blood, her ex-husband, the sheriff. Emily entered the courtroom, her hands shaking, but her eyes steely with determination. She had nothing left to lose. The truth had to come out, no matter what it cost her. As the trial unfolded, Emily found herself under the intense scrutiny of the public. Her emotions had been raw in the days after Carter's death, but now, as she sat in that courtroom, she was a different person. The woman who had been betrayed, the wife who had been scorned, had been replaced by something colder, something more determined. But as the trial progressed, Emily learned something that shocked her to the core. The prosecutor, the one who had been building the case against her, was someone who had known Carter for years. And it was in the middle of the trial that Emily realized he had been working with Rebecca all along. The power shift in the courtroom was immediate. Emily wasn't just fighting for her life anymore, she was fighting against a conspiracy that went all the way to the heart of the law enforcement system in the town. And now, as the truth started to come out, Emily knew one thing for sure. The real fight for justice was only just beginning. As the trial continued, Emily found herself haunted by one last question. Who else in her life had been lying to her? The walls were closing in. The truth was terrifying, and it seemed to only raise more questions than answers. The courtroom was packed with people, their eyes fixed on Emily as she sat, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. The once forgotten wife of the sheriff had now become the center of a conspiracy so deep it felt like the ground beneath her was giving way. Emily's pulse quickened as she glanced at the prosecutor, William Hardy, standing tall and unwavering, his sharp gaze directed at her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. She had thought she knew the man who had been so close to Carter for years. They had shared stories, drinks, and good-natured laughs about their small-town lives. But now, as Emily looked at him, she saw the predator beneath the polished exterior. William Hardy wasn't just trying to convict her, he was trying to bury the truth. The trial had shifted dramatically in the past few days. Emily's defense team had managed to unearth small but crucial pieces of evidence that tied Hardy and Rebecca together. Something no one had expected. While Emily had been in the dark about most of the details, the investigative team had uncovered damning information. Hardy and Rebecca had been more than just familiar with each other. They had been partners in crime. The day Emily's defense lawyer, a seasoned attorney named James Thompson, laid the evidence bare, the courtroom became a battlefield. Hardy's face turned ashen as James revealed phone records showing multiple communications between him and Rebecca just days before Carter's death. Emily's breath caught in her throat. These weren't just casual conversations. These were exchanges about money, arrangements, and a shared intent to cover up the most devastating truth of all. Objection. Hardy had shouted, trying to control the situation, but it was too late. The jury was already buzzing. Emily could hear whispers ripple through the room. The man who had been prosecuting her was now being scrutinized, his motives questioned. James Thompson pressed on, revealing one more piece of evidence that would shatter Hardy's carefully crafted image. He pulled out a stack of financial records that tied Hardy to several unexplained payments, money that seemed to come from nowhere and go straight into the hands of a shell company connected to the illegal arms operation Carter had been caught up in. Hardy's eyes flickered toward Rebecca, who sat motionless in the back of the room, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. The connections were undeniable. She wasn't just a woman scorned by Carter. She was a key player in the web of deceit and crime that had claimed his life. The courtroom was in uproar, but Emily felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in months she could see the truth unfolding. She had spent so long being the victim of Carter's betrayal, drowning in her pain and confusion, but now she was fighting for more than just herself. She was fighting for justice, for Carter, for herself, and for everyone whose lives had been torn apart by this conspiracy. That evening, Emily couldn't sleep. The trial had taken its toll on her, and her mind swirled with the same question that had haunted her since the moment Carter's body had been found on the church floor. How had everything gone so wrong? How had a life so full of promise and love turned into a tangled mess of lies, betrayal, and murder? In the stillness of her cell, Emily thought about the last words Carter had ever said to her, just days before his wedding to Rebecca. "You don't know what it's like, Emily," Carter had whispered, his voice broken with regret. "I never meant for it to end like this. But they have so much on me. I'm trapped." At the time, Emily had no idea what he was talking about. She had been blindsided by his affair, his lies, and his sudden disappearance. But now, as the pieces fell into place, she understood. Carter had been just as much a pawn as she had been. He had been trying to escape, trying to break free of a dangerous network he'd gotten involved in. But in doing so, he had sealed his fate. The next day, things took a darker turn. The defense had called for a recess, but as the court adjourned, whispers filled the halls. Emily could feel the weight of the tension in the air as she was led back to her holding cell. She was still reeling from the revelations of the day, but a cold feeling crept over her. Something was off. Suddenly, the door to her cell opened with a harsh bang, and Emily was greeted by a familiar face, Detective Collins. "We need to talk," he said, his voice filled with urgency. Emily followed him into a small room off to the side of the courthouse. "I've been getting some new information and it's not good," Collins said, his expression grave. "There's something we missed, something bigger than all of this. The network Carter was involved in is connected to a much larger operation, one that stretches far beyond the borders of this town. And it's getting dangerous." Emily felt her stomach tighten. She had been living in a nightmare for so long, she couldn't bear to think that it could get worse. "Who's behind it, Collins?" she asked, her voice trembling. Collins hesitated, then lowered his voice. "We think it's the governor. He's been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, using the sheriff's office to cover his tracks. Hardy was his man on the inside. Rebecca was just the tool. And now they're all scrambling to cover up their involvement." Emily's heart sank. The town had always felt small, safe, and familiar, but now it was a battleground. Everyone she had ever trusted was wrapped up in a game of power, deception, and murder. The truth was more horrifying than she could have imagined. The trial was nearing its end, and the momentum had shifted dramatically. Emily's lawyers were preparing to make their closing arguments, and with all the new evidence in play, it seemed like victory was within reach. But as the jury deliberated, the tension was palpable. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. And then, just as the jury came back to announce their verdict, something unexpected happened. The doors to the courthouse flung open, and a man in a suit walked in, his face grim. It was the governor's office. And he wasn't alone. His team of lawyers, flanked by several heavily armed bodyguards, made their way toward the front of the room. "What's going on?" Emily's lawyer, James, whispered, his hand tight on her shoulder. The governor had just entered the courtroom. The question that hung in the air was simple. Was this the final act of a corrupt system trying to silence the truth? Or had Emily finally uncovered the darkness that lay at the heart of everything she had once known? The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating. The air felt thick with anticipation as Governor Reynolds, accompanied by his entourage, strode to the front of the room. His presence sent a ripple of shock through the crowd, and Emily could feel the weight of his eyes as he glared down at her from the balcony. Everything was moving too fast for Emily to keep up. This had never been part of her plan. She had fought for justice, for the truth about Carter's death, but now it seemed the game was far bigger than she had realized. The governor's unexpected entrance was a sign that the stakes had just been raised. James Thompson, Emily's defense attorney, stood up from his seat, his expression cautious but resolute. "Your Honor, the defense has already presented its case. We demand a fair trial. This disruption..." The judge slammed the gavel. "Order. Governor Reynolds, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" The governor remained calm, his gaze never leaving Emily. He raised a hand, signaling his legal team to step forward. They presented documents to the court, official-looking papers that seemed to hold all the power. Emily's stomach churned as she watched the scene unfold. This was it, the final push to bury the truth. "Your Honor, I am here to offer a plea deal," the governor said coolly. "In light of the new developments surrounding the deceased sheriff's case, we believe it would be in the best interest of the people of this town if we settled this matter privately. A deal that would end this trial and bring closure to the families involved." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She knew what this was. A deal with the devil. James Thompson stood to his feet, his voice rising in disbelief. "A plea deal? For who?" "The defendant." His words were filled with incredulity. "You think you can just waltz in here and sweep everything under the rug?" Governor Reynolds' smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm offering closure, Mr. Thompson. Not only for Mrs. Rivers but for everyone involved. This trial has dragged on long enough. It's time to move on." Emily's mind was spinning. A part of her felt like this was just another attempt to cover up the truth, another power play in a game she hadn't fully understood. She could feel the walls closing in on her. But then something clicked. A memory from Carter's past. His final words, the cryptic way he had spoken to her about being trapped. No. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. The tension in the courtroom thickened as the judge called for a recess. Emily sat, hands trembling, her mind racing. The offer was clear. A plea deal that would save her from life behind bars, but at the cost of the truth. She had already lost so much, but she couldn't give up now. Not when she knew what had really happened. And then, as the room emptied for the break, something unexpected happened. A familiar face appeared at the doorway, Detective Collins. "I have new information," he said urgently, leaning in close to Emily. "The governor's not just involved in the sheriff's case. He's been running a syndicate with the same arms dealers Carter got caught up with. He's not here to offer you a deal. He's here to silence you once and for all." Emily's blood ran cold. All of the pieces were falling into place. The governor, Hardy, Rebecca, they were all part of a dangerous conspiracy that went far beyond just one murder. And now they were trying to pin it all on her to cover their tracks. The weight of it hit her like a ton of bricks. But in that moment she realized one undeniable truth. She had nothing left to lose. She wasn't going to be their scapegoat. The recess was over and everyone filed back into the courtroom. Emily took her seat, her resolve hardening. She was ready to fight. The truth needed to come out no matter the cost. The governor and his team returned to their seats, but Emily could feel his eyes on her the entire time, like a predator sizing up its prey. As the judge called the proceedings to order, Emily stood. The room fell silent. "I refuse the plea deal," Emily's voice rang out, steady and sure. "And I'm not backing down from the truth. Carter's death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was murder, a murder that the governor and his cronies planned from the start." The room erupted in chaos. The governor's face twisted with fury as he shot to his feet, but Emily didn't flinch. She had finally taken control of the situation. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one in power. "Your Honor," she continued, "I demand an investigation into the governor's ties to the arms syndicate. I won't let this trial be used to cover up a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top. I know the truth now and I won't let it be buried." James Thompson stood beside her, his jaw set in determination. "We'll make sure the truth comes out, Your Honor. No matter what." The judge, visibly shaken by Emily's defiance, called for another recess. The governor stormed out of the courtroom, his face a mask of barely contained rage. But as he left, Emily knew something had changed. The people in the room were no longer afraid. They were no longer intimidated. As Emily and her lawyer walked out of the courthouse, the weight of everything that had happened was finally beginning to settle. The fight wasn't over, but she had made it clear that she wasn't going down without a fight. Detective Collins caught up with them outside, a grim look on his face. "You're right, Emily. The governor's network is massive. But we've got our opening now. We can take them down, piece by piece." Emily nodded, feeling the first flicker of hope she had felt in months. "I won't rest until the truth comes out. Carter deserves that much." As she stared at the courthouse, the weight of what lay ahead still loomed large. But Emily was ready. The battle was far from over, but she had the one thing that had been missing all along: the truth. The dust had settled, but the storm was far from over. Emily stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, watching the world move on around her as if nothing had changed. But she knew better. Everything had changed. She had started a war, one that she couldn't undo, but one she had to fight to the very end. The investigation into the governor's involvement with the arms syndicate was now in full swing. Detective Collins had gathered more evidence than anyone had expected, and Emily's relentless pursuit of the truth was finally paying off. It seemed like every day brought a new revelation, a new twist, each one more horrifying than the last. The network of corruption stretched far and wide, and Emily's ex-husband Carter's death was only the tip of the iceberg. What had started as a case of betrayal had evolved into a far-reaching conspiracy that spanned from local law enforcement all the way to the highest offices in the state. The people who had once been untouchable, the ones who thought they could hide behind their power and privilege, were now being brought to justice one by one. Governor Reynolds, once untouchable, was under investigation for his direct involvement in a series of illegal arms deals, his connection to Carter's murder growing clearer by the day. Evidence surfaced showing that Carter had stumbled upon a vast criminal network during his time as sheriff, a network that had ties to everything from illegal arms trafficking to human trafficking. It had been Reynolds, along with a handful of corrupt officials, who had orchestrated the entire plot to silence Carter once he became a liability. It wasn't long before public pressure forced Reynolds to step down. The governor was arrested, and his carefully constructed empire began to unravel. But even as the wheels of justice started to turn, Emily couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her stomach. She hadn't gotten her closure. Not yet. Months had passed, and though justice was slowly unfolding, Emily still felt the weight of the past on her shoulders. Carter's funeral had been the hardest day of her life, worse than the moment he left her, worse than the betrayal. That day, standing over his grave, she had realized the full extent of what she had lost. Not just the man she thought she knew, but everything she had once believed in. She had never imagined she'd end up here, caught in a battle for truth and justice that would cost her everything. But Emily had come to terms with the harsh reality. Life wasn't about fairness. It was about survival. It was late one evening when the final breakthrough came. Detective Collins called with urgent news. The last of the key players in the conspiracy was in custody. A man named Bill Hardy, the corrupt detective who had worked alongside Reynolds, was ready to testify. He had been promised a deal in exchange for his cooperation, and now the final pieces were falling into place. It was over. The men and women who had conspired to destroy Emily's life were going down. The media was abuzz with the story, the headlines screaming about the fall of a governor, the sheriff's murder that had been covered up for years, and the explosive revelations that had shaken the state to its core. And yet, even as Emily allowed herself to breathe, there was still one question that haunted her. Was justice truly served? On the day Bill Hardy took the stand, Emily sat in the front row of the courtroom, her hands clenched in her lap. She had done everything she could. She had fought with everything inside her, and now she was watching the final act unfold. Bill Hardy was a broken man. He looked nothing like the imposing figure he had once been. The tough, confident demeanor was gone, replaced by the hollow shell of a man who had lost everything. His voice trembled as he recounted the details of the conspiracy, implicating the governor, local law enforcement, and even some of his closest friends. When the jury returned their verdict, it wasn't just a victory for Emily, it was a victory for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system, for everyone who had been silenced by power. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Emily remained still. She didn't feel the joy she thought she would. She didn't feel the weight lifting from her shoulders. All she could think about was Carter. In the weeks that followed, as the dust settled and the city began to heal, Emily found herself at the graveyard once again. This time she wasn't alone. Her mother had come with her, standing silently beside her as Emily placed flowers on Carter's grave. "He didn't deserve this, Mom," Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "None of this was his fault." Her mother nodded, her hand on Emily's shoulder. "I know, sweetheart. But the truth came out. And sometimes that's all we can do." Emily took a deep breath, wiping away a tear. It had been a long journey. The love, the betrayal, the murder, everything had been a part of a dark, twisted story that had consumed her life. But now she could finally begin to heal. The lessons were clear, though they hadn't been easy to learn. People could be deceived by appearances, by the lies they told themselves. But the truth always had a way of coming out, whether it was in the form of a confession, an investigation, or a storm that tore everything apart. Emily had learned that justice wasn't about revenge, it was about fighting for what was right, even when the world tried to silence you. And in the end, no matter how long it took, the truth would always prevail. And as the sun set behind the distant hills, Emily turned to leave. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could finally walk it with her head held high. The storm was over. But Emily knew better than to think she'd seen the last of the darkness.